This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Write On, showcasing the work of Otago Southland writers. I'm Beverly Martens. Join me for news and interviews with local writers on the second Wednesday of every month from noon till 1 and replayed the following Sunday at 1 p.m. Write On is brought to you by the Otago Southland branch of the New Zealand Society of Authors and kindly supported by the great team at the University Bookshop.
What do you want to be when you grow up? They say you are what you read, and the University Bookshop can help you be whoever you want to be. Do you want to be an athlete? Then sit down with an inspiring sports biography. Do you fancy yourself as a detective? We have a grisly lineup of murder mysteries waiting just for you. Do you aspire to be the world's greatest chef? We have cookbooks to tantalise your taste buds. Do you want to celebrate your inner child? Play up in our fabulous children's room. The University Bookshop, helping you decide what you want to be when you grow up.
Hello and welcome to our first Write On program of 2024. I'm your host, Beverly Martens. I hope the holiday break has been restful as you needed it to be, or equally is proving productive for those of you that are trying to carve out that really precious time and headspace to advance your creative writing. Now, someone who has been given that opportunity is my first guest, Dr. April-Rose Geers. April's just arrived in Dunedin and will be staying at the Robert Lord Cottage for the next few weeks as the University Bookshop's Emerging Writer in residence this summer. Now, welcome, April, and welcome to Dunedin. You're based in Auckland and you're currently lecturing at the University of Otago, but I understand you visited Dunedin last when you were about 12.
Yes, and thank you very much for having me here. Yes, I was in Dunedin last when I was 12. Let me see. The only thing I remember of it is the Cadbury Chocolate Factory, which I understand is
Sadly no longer
here.
with us, that's right. Yeah.
I hear it's been turned into a hospital, is that correct?
It's going to be. It's a building site and will be for the next few years, I would think, but that's the plan.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I do remember the steepest road as well.
Right.
But I had the horrible tendency as a child to be constantly buried in a book. So whenever we went on holiday, I have vague memories of what I could see over the top of the book on occasion.
Gosh, that sounds like you were able to read in the car without being sick.
Oh, I once read, 9 hours straight in a car without being sick, yep.
Amazing. Perfect
It's
child as far as...
No, my parents were constantly saying, put the book down and look out the window, the sunset's beautiful.
Now, great to have you here, but this last year has been a very big year for you. You completed your PhD in creative writing at Massey.
Yes.
On an incredibly interesting topic, transnational creative activism. Now,
That's
can
correct.
you kind of expand on that and tell our listeners?
Sure. So I was looking at how to advocate for human rights causes that are at a distance to us, culturally, geographically, linguistically. So just how to speak across those spaces, and the PhD itself was mostly about all of the ethical issues surrounding trying to do that kind of work.
Right. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that? What do you mean by some of the ethical issues?
So there are some perspectives that, if as somebody with privilege, as someone from a white background, we're not the right people to speak on behalf or speak as a part of of problems that are happening overseas, humanitarian crises. On the other hand, there are those of us, and I take this position myself, that feel that as somebody with privilege, I therefore have a duty to respond to issues that are happening, especially when those issues, those human rights crises, the people who are the most impacted are calling out and asking for people to join their cause and to add their voice to it and to help their voices be heard. And
we're all citizens of the world.
Well, exactly. Yeah. We all have a duty as a basic human being, really, to respond to others who are being persecuted for being human in their own ways, and for different things that we would deem they shouldn't be persecuted for. So yeah, I take that position, but in order to take that position, as soon as you start doing the work, you realise there are so many ethical issues, there are so many problems, and you constantly have to think about your own positionality in that. So if I've decided I am going to speak, then I have to think about how I do that. Most importantly, I have to be sure that I am being led by the most impacted, that I'm not trying to make my voice heard above everyone else's, but rather being led by those who are asking for other voices to join theirs.
That's really interesting, and we'll come to your specific project
Sure.
in a moment. But also, going back to your PhD, I know that you were awarded the valedictorian of the School of Humanities
For
at
that
NC.
ceremony, yes.
Yeah, which was, is a great privilege, but also probably slightly terrifying. Who did you speak to, and what about in front of how many people, etc.?
It was sort of a situation of, I've finally finished the oral exam, I don't have to do anything else. And then, oh, by the way, can you give a speech? I thought, okay, so this is just going to continue. That's great. But on the other hand, it was a huge honour, and I very much appreciated being awarded that. So, yeah, I think it was a 10-minute speech to the graduating body of that ceremony. So mostly the humanities, but there were some other schools that were graduating at the same time. I can't remember off the top of my head. And so I needed to write a speech that would speak to different levels of students, so students who were there from, a young age who had come straight through school, mature students, students from different schools and different disciplines. It needed to be 10 minutes long, no longer. And I needed it to be sort of both funny to some extent, or get some lighthearted, and also speak to this really hard time that we'd all gone through to graduate, because we were all, COVID students basically. So many of us did most of our work during lockdowns. There was very little in-person contact with teachers, and definitely a lot of issues with well-being. So I was trying to tick all those boxes, which meant that I needed to write the speech. It's very hard to deliver a 10-minute speech without having it written out so that you can time it properly, which is also not something I would normally do. I'd normally prefer to just talk.
But I guess your skills as a poet would have sort of helped, wouldn't it?
To keep it succinct.
yeah, and just really the key messages done with less words but more impact, perhaps.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I definitely used the processes that I'd learnt to use as a poet in terms of just sort of writing everything out. We call that kind of like a data bank, where you just write out all of the things that you think should be in it.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, and then you go through and you just select the key words, the key sentences, and then rebuild it from there.
Yeah. Oh, well done. That's a great honour, I think, to have done that, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. Now, you're down here now. Let's get to the specifics of your project that you were working on down here, because I know when Anna from UBS was on the show in December, she mentioned, we sort of announced who the emerging writer in residency had been, and she's, there was a lot of applicants, and she really felt yours was a standout because it's such a complex kind of project that you're taking on, and I understand that loosely you describe it as a creative nonfiction memoir drawing on something like eight years of research and journaling. But do you want to kind of delve into that now and try and encapsulate what you're trying to achieve while you're here?
Sure. I mean, there are a couple of ways to tell the journey of that project. I'll try to keep it short because of the time constraints. So basically, I developed a sort of poetic relationship with a writer who was imprisoned in Iran, Mahvash Sabit. So she's Baha'i. She was imprisoned for a 10-year period, 2008 to 2018, for being Baha'i. And she managed to write a collection of poems from behind bars. She wrote them on little bits of tissue paper and had them smuggled out in the lining of people's jackets when they left. It's an incredible story, and you can read Bahiya Nakhchivanyi helped to translate Mahvash's one piece of Mahvash's story, telling how that happened, and that's now available online, I think, published through Pen International's website.
Can I just jump in there and say, for listeners that don't realise, Pen International is kind of a sort of subset of the New Zealand Society of Authors, in that it, as well as the Society of Authors obviously focusing on, New Zealand or whichever country they're in, the needs and representing the needs and of their writers. it's kind of an international thing, but also about sort of freedom of speech and those kinds of things, isn't it? And it tries to always highlight the plight of of writers or journalists who are imprisoned and support them in any way that they can.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful way for writers in one country who have more freedom to advocate on behalf of writers in another country who don't. So Pen was actually how I first got into the project. I was reading the writers in prison case lists, and I just went through all the names and found all of the different writers that interested me who had work that was available, ordered that writing, books, novels, poetry online, read it, and it took me, I think, probably about a year to work through that and eventually land on Marvash's story. And so that's how that journey started. Yes, so Marvash got her poetry out. It was published in English in 2013, and there were a couple of writers that really interested me for the PhD. So initially, with any PhD, you start and it's huge, and slowly you learn how much you have to narrow it down. So I started with quite a few different writers. They were all writers who were being persecuted for their writing, because that was what really interested me, to how they'd managed to get their writing out anyway, or how they had, despite persecution, or whether they had written in a response to persecution. It was that relationship that initially got me into it. I wound up just with Marvash's story. And I was in the UK, and I was going through a sort of difficult time myself. And her poetry, I felt like it brought me back to the world out of a time that was almost like depression for me. And it brought me, I guess it was a tie to the real world in a way. And so then I felt that I owed a reciprocal response, because even though this woman was going through such a horrible time, she'd helped me, and so I wanted to reach back out to her. So I started writing poems to her, and I sent them once a week. I'd walk to the post office. I was flat broke then, but I used the little bit of money I had to send a poem to her every week, because that seemed important. Even though I knew she would probably never get them in prison, I knew that they'd be confiscated, it still was something that I needed to do. And so the journey started from that, and then 8 years later, a research project that looked at all the ethical issues of advocating, a poetry collection that is about the many different borders that I had to navigate in that relationship. So the border of language, that Marvash spoke a different language to me, and that the poems I were reading had been translated into English. I developed a really strong relationship with that translator, and we found that we really understood how poetry works through different languages, or as a language in itself. And then the border of geography, the physical separation, and the knowledge that if I continue down this path, I could probably never myself visit Iran. And then the cultural border as well, just being so aware of cultural differences, but also, interestingly for me, finding ways in which our being able to share different cultural stories was actually, I think, a meeting point to some extent.
And also that, because you never want to be like patronising in some way, like you're trying to help, but you might come across as patronising unwittingly. And also the paradoxes that I know that, you and I have talked about off air. I think what you said, one of your poems, you were sort of so paralysed by those paradoxes and that it took you like 2 years to write. The main poem, when I came to a point where I thought I have to have a poem that explicitly says that a poem that takes action, that really says what I think about this issue and my response to this issue of Baha'i persecution in Iran, the way in which Baha'i are treated simply because they follow a faith that is different to the main faith in Iran. So just to give you a little context, land confiscations is very common. Baha'i are imprisoned regularly for being Baha'i. They're not allowed to work with food because it's believed that they are corrupted, and so they will corrupt the food. It's all levels of persecution. And I needed a poem that would take action for this issue. And as soon as I started to do it, I realised how incredibly hard it was to do that, because every time I tried to write it, I felt that I couldn't write it, that I wasn't the right person, that I
would make a mess of it, that because of my privilege I shouldn't be saying these things. And so it was just this circle of starting again and again and again and trying every tool in my disposal to write this poem. And every time I had a draft, but none of it was ever going to be good enough. And so I wound up, after 2 years, I finally wrote the poem by going to all of my drafts and going to my research journal, which I'd been keeping, and just writing this whole problem out all the time. And I combined them into the poem, and that was what it was. So the poem wrote itself by being something that couldn't be written. And I relate it as well to, there are a lot of writers, I think, who have found they've been caught in this paradox of only being able to write about an issue by saying they can't. And it made me think of Tusiata Avia's I Cannot Write a Poem About Gaza. There's a book where a bunch of writers wrote about an issue in Iran from the Republic in Ireland, from the Republic of Conscience. And 3 of the writers, they were all asked they were given a task of writing 500-word essay or creative writing piece in response to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And 3 of the writers in that collection wrote about how they couldn't do the task. It wasn't possible. And so all of those things have sort of led me to this question now, which I would love to run a workshop on or something, or get some other views on. Is it possible to write about an issue like this without being caught in that paradox? Because, of course, when you write a poem or a creative piece saying, I can't do this, you are actually doing it. Yeah. So it is in itself essentially a lie, because you know that in writing it and in publishing it, it's out there. You've just sort of ticked the box of saying, oh, I know that I shouldn't really be doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So is there a way to do it without being in that paradox? Or is that paradox actually necessary? Is that a necessary foundation point in which to build?
And these thoughts and reflections, they're going to be a huge part of your project. I mean, this is what you're trying to all pull together while you're down here, is that right?
Yeah. So it's sort of ongoing from the PhD. The PhD covered sort of academically all the major ethical questions that I could think of in the course of it. It was a series of essays that are all being published in different journals. So it was by publication. And I have to be very careful about which bits of it get published. Due to issues of risk for the person, Marvash herself, who is imprisoned again at the moment. And then for this project, the idea is more that I have this collection of poems, and the context I'm telling you now, matters so much to the story of the poems. So the idea for this collection is to use those poems as sort of key points through it and to write the story around each one. And that's how I would be organising my time as well. Take a poem, write the story around how I wrote it, all of the other things that happened in that space and time, all of the issues I was dealing with, and just sort of draw it all together that way. That
sounds fantastic, because I think by doing that you're going to be able to lead people who haven't, done the research as you have into the story and the issue, because you've done it, and by contexting it for other people, I think it will make it, something quite complex more accessible.
Yes, and I think that there are actually many, many other people who have gone down this path as well. So I'm hoping that perhaps this leading, more sort of contributing the questions that I've faced and my issues and my story, and then seeing what other people have done and hopefully having a conversation with those people, because I'd be really interested to hear what other people's journeys are in this sense.
So I think now, labels, but kind of a poet activist, I think.
Yep, that'd suit.
Yeah, I'll take it. Now, how is that? I think we've sort of covered what that means in the broader world. What does it mean for you? Like, what are your kind of feelings about it, and how does it lead you?
There are a couple of things I could talk about in that area. One of them is just, you're always caught between the sort of level of responsibility you feel for an issue and the level of uncertainty about being able to do the work, which is why my collection is called, at the moment, sort of a tentative title, Border Walker, because you're
walking a fine line.
It's a space you need to be in. If you didn't feel you were in that space, there'd be a problem. So walking that line is the nature of being a poet activist, I believe. Allowing yourself to have that sort of uncertainty and to always be questioning and have a level of ethical reflexivity so that you don't think you always have a right to do what you're doing.
Or you have the answers.
Or that you have the answers.
Yeah.
Mostly you just learn to find your own position, and then that's the position you can speak from. And also always be open to hearing other people's positions.
Yeah, so that position might modify, change based on new information.
And then the other thing I would say on that is you always have to be careful about the level of responsibility other people place on you. So if you start saying, or as I've started saying, that I'm a poet activist, my area of research is, one area, immediately people will start to suggest other things I could take action for. And, you're just one person. You can only do so much. So, and there's also the issue of basic well-being. I'm dealing with some serious international problems and some really hard stories. So I have to find a way to balance the time that I put into reading and hearing these things, these stories of torture,
without it completely overwhelming you and wanting you to curl up in a ball in the corner.
Which it does sometimes.
Right.
And then I need a few days and then I can sort of come back to it again and find something fun to sort of counterbalance that.
Talking of fun, because I know one of your hobbies is equally interesting, which is a kind of a sport leisure. I'm not sure how you describe it, but it's aerial silks. Do you want to talk about how you got into that and if you'd be able to do some of that in Dunedin?
Yeah, aerial arts, circus. So I've been doing silks classes for 2 years, mostly beginner. I sort of moved into intermediate silks, but I've had a bit of a break now, so I might go back to beginner. It's where you have 2 pieces of silk that hang from the ceiling and you do kind of gymnastic acrobatics in the air. It's kind of like a cross between dance and sport. I do dance trapeze. I love dance trapeze. And I've been doing that just for less than a year. And I really got into hula hooping lately, especially because the wonderful thing about hula hooping, if you get collapsible hoops, is you can take it with you when you travel. So that's definitely something I'll be doing while I'm here. And then, I might try your Brophy studio out as well.
I'm sure some of our listeners will know Brophy Aerials because they have been involved in some creative collaborations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they've done a couple, they've sort of been part of some creative works that my friend Jonathan Quayeth, as a director, has done at both the Gasworks and Sinclair Pool. Mm-hmm. So they work together to sort of show the physical side of the story sometimes. It's just fascinating. So,
that's something I'm really interested in, how you would combine poetry and aerials.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So I'm sure that they, get in touch with them and I'm sure they will embrace you. And also I was just thinking about hula hooping. I mean, that's the only thing you can do when you're doing it. Like you've got to sort of concentrate on the coordination of that. So that would sort of free your mind. I think that would be a really healthy thing to do.
I definitely view it as a form of meditation to some extent and definitely well-being. I mean, there's a lot, I think, that's been written about circus as a form of therapy, really. It can definitely be used that way. For me, hula hooping, I know that juggling is almost better than this, but hula hooping does it a bit as well. It occupies a certain part of your mind, which actually, if you're doing something repetitively, it can help you to use the other part of your mind to solve problems. But you've got to get to a point where you can actually get a rhythm going and you know what you're doing before you get to that stage.
Look, we could chat all day.
Easily.
really interesting to talk to you, and I wish you all the best, April, with your time here in Dunedin and all your future endeavours, and I'm sure that we will see them published, down the track. So, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to take a short musical break now and play a track from arguably a couple of veteran poet activists, Woody Guthrie and Billy Bragg. It's a track from Mermaid Avenue, which is a musical collaboration between Billy and Jeff Tweedy from Wilco, who took the unpublished lyrics of Woody Guthrie, with obviously their family permission as well, and set them to music and sang, and then sang finished songs. So the track I've chosen is upbeat because of its theme of better days ahead, and it's called California Stars. Welcome back. My final guest on this episode of Write On is well-known local writer Kathryn van Beek. Now, as many of you will know, Kathryn is a short story writer, screenwriter and essayist, and was last year's Burns Fellow here at the University of Otago. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be back on ORFM.
Now, before we get into the specifics of the creative endeavours you've tackled in this past year, can you just sum up in a few words what your Burns year has been like?
Oh, magical. The Burns Fellowship is something a lot of writers apply for, and it's something I certainly wished and longed for a long time, and it ended up being probably even better than I could have imagined. It's just been a year of development and self-discovery. I feel as though it's been a bit of a self-directed master's degree in a way. It's been wonderful.
Fantastic. Now, and you being a local, as it were, as opposed to sort of moving to Dunedin specifically for the fellowship, I mean, do you think that's been an advantage, or is that maybe a bit of a distraction because your real life still goes on, on at home? And
I think it could go either way. I mean, for me, it's been a real advantage because I already knew Dunedin and I knew a little bit about the university, so I already felt at home and I didn't have to spend too much time figuring out how to fit my life around the fellowship. So I was able to jump in without any distractions. But on the other hand, someone else coming in from somewhere else would have all that joy of discovering Dunedin in all different places.
Yeah.
I think both have their advantages.
Yeah, and their life could be a bit sort of out of sight, out of mind, so that they concentrated more on their projects. I mean, did you work in at the university a lot at the office, or?
Yeah, I have an office on the first floor of the arts building, and I just decided to keep office hours. So I'd come in the morning wearing office-ish clothes and just spend a day.
You'd still be one of the more well-dressed people there then. But you treated it like a job.
Yeah,
so
I
did.
And then in the middle of the year, I went to Hungary. When I got back, I started working from home a bit more, which is a bit of a long story, but I had a sick cat to look after. So, and then I was able to make the most of the flexibility, being in the office when it suited and being at home when it suited as well.
Right, yeah, because you got into your groove by then, I think. And we'll come back to Hungary in a bit. I think mainly your project was working, refining the drafts of a novel. Is that right this year? And can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think I always have a portfolio of projects on the go, and this year's been no different. So I applied to work on some short stories, which I've been working on, but then because you have this year and you have the opportunity to go in all these different directions, so you're not so constrained by time, I ended up falling in love with writing essays. So I wrote a few essays. I've got plenty of ideas for other essays as well. And yeah, I had this secret project, which was a novel, and I didn't really tell anyone about it because I wasn't sure if I could finish a novel because I'd never written a novel before.
Right, so
but I have now.
Ah, okay, carry on.
So I've finished a novel, which feels great. Like whatever happens, if it gets published or not, it's just great to know that I can finish it and that I can write another one.
That's amazing. And you're talking about 90,000 words type of thing, a manuscript around that size?
Yeah, so I had a draft coming into the fellowship that I'd written as a result of doing a class actually with Magella Kulinain, who was a previous Burns Fellow.
Yep.
And that had been sitting in a drawer for a while, and I dusted that off. And I had another couple of projects on the go as well. I co-edited a book called Otherhood, and I worked on a little screen project called Misconceptions About Anxiety. So that was a web series, and I did the accompanying articles that went along with that.
Can you just expand on that? Because I was reading about that and I didn't quite understand the parameters of it. Did you wrote the print articles in the Herald? Were in the Herald, is that right?
That's right. So I work with producer and director Charlotte Wanhill on this is our second one. We also did one about miscarriage. So on both projects I worked as a researcher in the background and helped structure the series, but then I wasn't, when it came down to filming, Charlotte did that, although I did get to interview one person for the second season, which was really interesting. And then I write the articles. So that those series were both published in the Herald. So you can watch the videos online, and there's also an accompanying bit of text that I wrote.
Right. Okay. And how long are these series? Like, are you
They're about 10
eps?
10-minute episodes.
Right.
And afterwards, Charlotte puts them both together into kind of a standalone documentary. Yeah, they've both gone all around the world.
Wow.
In festivals and things. That's been really great.
Excellent. And I also think that you're probably the only Burns Fellow that has put a residency within a residency, as it were. So you're down, you're here for the year in terms of wearing that hat as the Burns Fellow, but somehow in the middle of that you have a separate residency over in Hungary for about a month, I think. How did all that coincide and come about?
That was just an extraordinary thing, really. So I'm someone who's always applying for things, and I have this big writing spreadsheet, and I can see back to when I first started taking writing seriously, all the things I've applied for and whether I got a yes or a no.
All right.
And there's this thing that you can do as a short story or a short form writer in particular, which is trying to get 100 rejections a year, because you couldn't do it with a novel because you couldn't write that many novels. But if you're writing short pieces and you can write quite a few of them in a year, it's actually pretty easy to.
Oh, so this is like the badge of honour, is it?
Yeah.
I've been rejected 100 times.
Because it takes the sting out of rejections a little bit. If
okay.
you're kind of
It's
thinking,
sort of
it's
a bit
close
of a
to the
sport.
100.
Yeah.
So I think the most I've ever managed to get one year, I got about 71 or something. But I am always applying for things, and I think I'd applied for the Burns about 5 times, so I wasn't necessarily expecting to get it.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
But it was amazing too. And then I'd also applied for this residency in Hungary. I just thought, that'd be interesting. And if I get it, which I probably won't, but if I get it, I can probably arrange with my workplace to take a month's leave and go and pick it up. But as it happened, I got them both, and they were both within the same year.
Right. I thought it might have been a COVID delay or something, that, you were planned to go to Hungary a couple of years earlier, and of course you weren't able to, and then
but
it rolled
it worked
over.
out perfectly, because of course when you are working, you only have the 4 weeks leave, so it would have been a bit difficult to have arranged. So it was perfect that it was within
Because
the
you'd already
Burns year.
taken the year.
Yeah.
And were they flexible about when you could go?
Yeah. So my husband came along as well, so we
brilliant.
arranged it around the school holidays because he's a teacher.
Excellent. Now, I understand while you're over there that you researched all about wolves. Just one question. Why?
Well, a lot of my work is about animals, how we treat animals, the strange attitudes we have towards animals. So a lot of my short stories touch on animals, and the essays I've been writing have touched on animals as well.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure what I was going to write about when I was in Hungary, but I actually met a Hungarian colleague at the university before I went over, and he told me about this wolf.
Right, so that kind of gave you a particular focus.
It was perfect, and it meant when I was in Hungary, so I spent most of my time staying in the artist quarter in a city called Pécs, which was about the same size as Dunedin. But because I knew I wanted to learn more about this wolf, it gave me some.
So it's a singular wolf, is it? Is it
yeah,
like a fairy tale wolf or a?
No, it's a real life, or it was, record-breaking wolf who travelled from Switzerland to Hungary to find a mate.
Ah.
So I was able to build my fellowship around going to some of the places where the wolf had been on his travels.
And I mean, is this a recent thing that this is a contemporary wolf?
It had just happened before I met my colleague.
Right.
So he said, "Have you heard about the wolf?"
Right. So it's sort of a media star or something.
Yeah.
How amazing.
So I've written an essay about that called The Swiss Wolf. So hopefully that will pop up somewhere.
Yeah. I have kind of picked up on that theme about animals in your work, and you've kind of gone from sort of cozy domestic stories of, obviously, your kitten Bruce, the stories about that. And then you've got some quite darker stories in your short story collection, sort of emotional support animals, or are they? In Pet, which came out in, I think, 2020. Yeah. Yeah. So why do you think the animals thing it features for you?
I don't know. I've always been interested in animals, and I just think we have such interesting relationships with animals, and such absurd, nonsensical illogical relationships with animals, you know, the ones we love and the ones we take to the vet and spend lots of money on, and the ones we get pet sitters for, and the ones we eat, and the ones we use, the ones we press into our service as working animals, are the ones we consider pests.
Yes, and where that line is,
Yeah.
you know, like I know Korea is apparently just in the process of passing legislation where they will no longer eat dogs, and yet dogs were considered quite a delicacy, and, you know, older Koreans feel about that, and that got me thinking, because that's just been in the news, and that got me thinking, well, where is that line, you know?
Yeah, and I think
why a
probably,
dog or not a horse, or why not a horse but a cow?
There'd be a lot of farms out there where there's an old sheep that had once been a hand-raised lamb.
True.
That people just couldn't bring themselves to slaughter, you know. So we're quite interesting in our relationships with animals. So it's just such a rich vein.
Yeah, and the way that we personify them as well and give them personalities and conversations, and, you know, that goes on with, you know, we almost try and sometimes with our pets suppress their natural being and try and make them more human, you know, so that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Yeah,
there's so much there. Yeah,
great. And I mean, just out of interest, how many pets do you currently have or have had? Or
well, this yes, because I went to Hungary thinking, I'm going to write this essay about this wolf and it'll be great, and it was, but we had this strange thing that happened while I was away, where when I left we had 2 cats, then I came back and we only had one, because one of them had unfortunately died of old age while we were away, which we had thought might happen, and then the other one had actually been attacked by a dog and almost died. So that was an interesting animal story in itself. He's doing all right now. That's Bruce.
Oh, that is Bruce.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, is that big another book, or is it maybe not?
Well, I'd always been tempted to do a third Bruce the Cat children's book called Bruce Goes to the Vet, and he really...
Oh, and he really did.
He really has spent a lot of time there.
Right, let's kind of talk about some other aspects of your life, because obviously, you know, the animal thing is sort of a lighter thing, but you've got this upcoming anthology, Otherhood, which you co-edited, and that's coming out, I think,
in May.
In May, right. So that's quite personal to you too. Is there anything you want to kind of talk about the anthology in general and your involvement and personal experience in particular?
Yeah, well, Otherhood is 35 essays that all touch on the experience of not having children or not being a mother in the traditional sense. So I'd written an essay about this because I read a lot of essays about infertility and miscarriage and all these things, because they're things that I've experienced as well. But I've just read so many essays where they finish with the person who's written the essay having their miracle baby. I just read one too many of these essays, and I was so annoyed. I thought I'd write my own essay where that wasn't the ending. And then just as I'd finished that, Kate Camp came out with her incredible essay called No Miracle Baby to See Here, which you can read on the spin-off and in her essay anthology. And I was like, oh no, someone else has written about this. But there was this little conversation on Twitter that happened saying, oh, this essay is great. And this lady called Lil O'Brien, who I'd met once, kind of said, oh, maybe there's an anthology in this. Because I've got my own story as well. And I thought, that's actually a really great idea. So I sent Lil a direct message. And then we started making this anthology with Ali Benj as well, who's another writer. And she's written some essays about, she chose to be child-free, so why she chose that path. So that's called, that can be called being a dink, double income, no kids. So that's a completely different kind of perspective on things. So we thought, one of these projects where you think, well, we'll edit an essay anthology, how hard could that be? But of course it was a bit harder than we thought, but it's been really fun.
Was it hard because you got a lot more submissions than you had thought and had to cull it, or in what way was it hard?
That was hard choosing the essays, because we did get a number of essays and they were really great. And it was interesting being on the other side as a writer, because usually you're the one getting the rejection emails. And it was interesting being on the other side and seeing how, in some ways, it is fairly arbitrary, because so many of the essays were so beautifully written. But if we had 2 on a similar kind of subject, we would only select one. Yeah, just to try and get a nice range of stories.
Yeah.
And then the actual editing of the essays, going back and forth with writers and having suggestions, that was really interesting and fun, but one of those things that takes quite a long time. And then proofing the final manuscript and deciding which order to put things in and writing the introduction. I don't know. It doesn't sound like a lot now, but it certainly has taken a lot of our time.
But I think it's a little over a long period of time because there's different tasks as the project progresses. Now, something else you had to do for that, and you've also done for other creative things, is crowdfunding, because you needed to, or you didn't need, but you absolutely wanted to pay the contributors to Otherhood. Now, that's not your first rodeo doing crowdfunding, but
it's my fourth rodeo.
Yeah, but it's not. I mean, how do you find that process?
Well, I feel as though I would like to write an essay about this one day, but probably not until later in my career because, who knows, I might have to do crowdfunding again. But, crowdfunding is amazing because it enables you to do things that perhaps you couldn't have done without it because it is so hard to get funding because there's just not much funding to go around. And if you're unable to fund a project yourself, then crowdfunding enables you to do that. So that's fantastic. But on the other hand, it is incredibly time-consuming and stressful. And, of course, all that time and energy takes you out of what you really want to be doing, which is your creative work. And that's the real value that you're really adding. So I think I don't know what to say about that. I think 4 times is definitely enough. And I'd be happy never to do it again, but you just don't know, do you?
So do you have any tips for other people considering or needing to go down that route?
I just don't underestimate it. For my first one in particular, I spent a lot of time listening to podcasts about crowdfunding and reading blogs about crowdfunding, and you're going to need a big spreadsheet or a big Trello board or something like that. There's just a lot that goes into it because there's a huge promotional campaign you need to do around it. It's a huge time and energy investment, so just buckle up.
Yeah. Very good. Now, some other things that you've done during your Burns year, what would you say the highlights have been? Can you think back on the last 12 months? Because you're about 2 weeks away from handing over the baton, which you probably don't want to do. But
it's all just been so great, just from having my own office through to the people in the English department who are all so friendly and wonderful. And there were some just lovely events that were held when I started, from a morning tea in the English department where they had those iced animal biscuits in a nod to my short story collection pet,
nice,
through to kind of these grand events such as being able to go to the Burns dinner at Toitu, which was magnificent. Hungary, of course, was amazing.
You did some stuff in the print room at the University of Otago too, didn't you? Which is
did.
Quite a special facility. Can you elaborate on that?
I decided to run a couple of workshops for students and staff at the university just so that I could give back a little bit to say thanks for this amazing year. So I did 2 flash fiction workshops, and for that I wanted some prompts. And so Chef Rogers showed me into the print room, and of course, it was an animal theme, so I printed out some animal prints that were already in the print room, these incredible old illustrations from old advertising campaigns and that kind of thing. So we printed these beautiful images, and they were used as prompts for the workshops. Then later on, I worked with some people at the library to turn them into an exhibition in the Robertson Library with some little magazines that people could pick up and take away.
Oh, fantastic. I didn't see that. And something else you did, which I thought was completely charming, and sadly I wasn't able to go because of COVID, damn it. But you had a kind of a mini Burns sort of thing at one of the cafes here, didn't you? A night.
I did. Yeah. I had a kind of celebration night at Maggie's, which was kind of open to anyone, particularly kind of writers and writing adjacent people and readers, and again, just kind of wanting to give something back to the. It
was kind of a thank you,
community.
Wasn't it?
Yeah,
that was November, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
And the City of Literature came on board as well, and they worked with Maggie's to provide these absolutely incredible cheese platters, and it was such a lovely night, and it was so nice to look around and see writers that I know meeting for the first time, contributors to Otherhood who hadn't met before.
Right.
Some of them got to meet for the first time.
So it was sort of a fellowship thing, and letting other people make the connections that you had made in your year.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Yeah, there weren't any speeches or anything like that. It was all just for people to have fun and get to know each other as writers.
And as I was mentioned earlier, your year, because it goes from the January to the January, because it's tied in with Robbie Burns. For the people who don't know, it's literally tied in with his birthday on the 25th of January. That's the kind of handover day, isn't it? Now, often some of the other Burns Fellows over the years, their last thing is to actually judge the Robert Burns poetry competition, which is held here in Dunedin, has got kind of an international focus now. But that's something you chose not to do because you didn't feel that you sort of had the poetry chops for it, as it were.
Yeah, I write a bit of everything under the sun, really, but the one thing I don't really write is poetry, so I just didn't feel I'd be well qualified for that. But I did judge the university's creative writing competition that had a short story component and a poetry component.
Yeah, how's that?
That was brilliant. There were so many amazing writers who submitted their work.
Yeah, because that's open, I think, to university staff and alumni.
And students.
And students, of course, students, yeah. Yeah, so did you get lots of entries?
Oh, yeah, there were over 100 and the quality was just really great.
Right.
So I ended up giving out highly commendeds as well as
So that was something you sort of took on. That wasn't an expectation that you would judge that. You just thought you would? Yeah.
I think every Burns Fellow probably gets asked to do certain things, and I suppose it's up to them what they are able to say yes to and what they're not.
And I guess finally, Kathryn, let's talk about the year ahead for you. Do you know, I mean, you've obviously got terrific momentum. You've got your spreadsheet out, going to see how many rejections you're going to get. You don't want to beat 71, you want to be pulling that down. But what's ahead for you, and what does 2024 hold for you?
Oh, well, I'll be back in the office pretty soon. Not the Burns office, but work office. So that'll be...
so this is your day job, is it? Or you're not talking about your home office here. You're talking about...
Yeah, I'll be back at my day job.
Right.
But that'll be fun.
Is that full-time?
It will be for a few months, but in general, I try to work 4 days a week, which is really good.
Right.
Yeah. So going into the Burns was actually a bit of a shock to the system, which I hadn't anticipated. Took a bit of an adjustment. So I'm thinking that coming out of the Burns will be the same. There'll probably be a couple of weeks where I'm just readjusting to a different schedule, different way of doing things.
Yeah, different rhythm.
Yeah. But I have plenty of ideas to keep me going on the writing front. And the Burns Fellowship has been fantastic for that. It's just helped me generate these ideas that I feel as though I've got enough material to write over the next couple of years, really.
Right, so you've stockpiled in effect, and now you'll be refining some of the things that you've started or done drafts of this year? Yeah.
Yeah, or even just doing first drafts of ideas that have popped into my head that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
And also, we haven't mentioned, you're the NZSA representative for our region, the Otago Southland region. So you're on the national board of NZSA. Can you just want to briefly cover off what that involves?
Yes. Well, shall I give a shameless plug for the New Zealand Society of Authors?
I try and do it all the time. Have at it.
It really, one of the first things I did when I got serious about writing was join the Society of Authors. And the fee isn't very high, and you get an email that comes regularly with so many opportunities in it.
Yep, that's every
which
fortnight.
has really helped me generate my 71 rejections, because otherwise I wouldn't have known about all those opportunities. But through the NZSA, you can apply for things like mentorships. You can apply for manuscript assessments. One year I got a free manuscript assessment of PET, which was really helpful. It's a great way to meet other people, form a community. I would thoroughly recommend it. So being on the board's been interesting, learning a bit about what goes on behind the scenes and all the advocacy work that gets done for writers. But as a writer, particularly an emerging writer, I would highly recommend joining.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Look, thanks, Kathryn. Always a pleasure. And you've always got so much on the go. So if listeners want to try and keep up with you in the months and years ahead, I would suggest that they keep an eye on your website, which is kathrynvanbeek.co.nz.
That's right. I've got a newsletter as well they can sign up for on the website. I probably typically send about 2 a year, so it's not too annoying.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kathryn. Now, meanwhile, thanks everyone for listening, and until next month, happy writing, and we'll talk to you then. Goodbye.
What do you want to be when you grow up? They say you are what you read, and the university bookshop can help you be whoever you want to be. Do you want to be an athlete? Then sit down with an inspiring sports biography. Do you fancy yourself as a detective? We have a grisly lineup of murder mysteries waiting just for you. Do you aspire to be the world's greatest chef? We have cookbooks to tantalise your taste buds. Do you want to celebrate your inner child? Play up in our fabulous children's room. The University Bookshop, helping you decide what you want to be when you grow up.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.